the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Hello and welcome back to the show. We are continuing our dive into communication techniques today, covering the concept of appreciative inquiry. I'm Steven Sagash here with Tulio Siragusa and Ashmar. Hey guys, how's it going?
Great.
All right, let's do this. So this is both, I think, a communication approach and a kind of a change management approach that helps engage and involve your teams and staff. Ash and Tulio, let's dive in here. Ash, kick us off. Give us a little background on appreciative inquiry.
Yeah, so Appreciative Inquiry was developed in the mid-1980s by David Cooperrider and his mentor Suresh Srivastava at Case Western University. They introduced it as a revolutionary approach to organizational development and change management. Now, what Appreciative Inquiry, why it was developed was that it was trying to combat the traditional problem-solving method, focusing on only identifying issues and deficiencies within an organization. Cooperrider and Srivastava believe that this deficit-based approach often limited creativity and reinforced negative perceptions of people within themselves. So they proposed appreciative inquiry as a way to shift focus to what works well, thereby unlocking positive potential.
All right, Tulio, let's define appreciative inquiry now. So kind of got a little context there.
I really love this because it reminds me of when you're trying to grow a lawn and you want to make it really plush and thick, you just plant a lot more seeds. You overseed over and over until all the weeds get choked out and all you have is great grass. So if you guys are trying to figure out how to have a good lawn, there's your little secret. So at its core, appreciative inquiry is really a strengths-based collaborative approach that seeks to identify and build upon the best of what is, and also to envision what could be. So it's like, where are we now? What's the best of that right now? And then where could we be? What can we envision ourselves to be? And it's really about exploring and amplifying the positive core of an organization. Its achievements, the assets of the organization, and also looking at unexplored potentials, innovation, strengths, and vital tradition. It really reminds me actually of the first phase of a force field analysis where we look at all the driving forces that are working in favor of an organization towards a goal. So it's, and similarly in a force field analysis, you engage all the stakeholders at all levels because you're trying to foster collective learning and co-creation of this shared future. So it's a very effective way to understand the driving forces you want to amplify. And being appreciative is really about valuing or recognizing the best in people and the world around us. So it's a reaffirming positive way to acknowledge the past and present strengths, successes, and the potential of individuals in the organization. The inquiry part is really the act of exploring, discovery, being curious, asking questions, being open to new possibility. And that rings similar to a stage of design thinking, which is part of the empathizing, which is really about understanding what's going on. So it's a combination of gratitude and empathy that brings together this effective communication style of appreciative inquiry.
So this is often guided by this, what they call a 4D cycle, which consists of 4 phases, and it's discover, dream, design, destiny. And so discover, it's, identify and appreciate the best of what exists. Dream, envision what could be, like Tula mentioned, imagine the organization's greatest potential. Design, co-construct how the organization can work to achieve the dream. And I think the key word there is co-construct. And destiny, implement and sustain the proposed design, empower collective action toward the vision. Tulio, let's get into those a little bit more. Let's start with that discovery.
Yeah, I really love these. These are so simple. and effective. So let's talk about the discovery phase. So that's where participants share stories of peak experiences and successes. So often we go into what's not working. This is the opposite. This is really about highlighting what is working. Let's discover what's working very well. And it's really about uncovering the organization's strengths and what gives life to it. Then once you've identified those things, like what are we good at? Let's celebrate that, right? Then what can we do with this? How do we dream with this foundation? And then you move into the dream phase. And that's really about building on those strengths that have been identified. And then being able to envision, all the stakeholders being able to envision a future where all those strengths were amplified. So this phase encourages bold, creative thinking without constraints. So it's kind of like asking the question, if I had no constraints or no limitation, what could I do with these strengths? So it's about dreaming the possibilities. And you see there's a phased approach to this. Then after you can envision the future, then of course you're like, okay, let's design it. What do we do now? We've identified our strength. We can see moving forward how these strengths could give us the ability to accomplish what we thought was impossible. Now there's the design phase. And this is where the participants collaboratively design the structures, the processes, and all the strategies that will support the envisioned future. It's kind of like, okay, we see ourselves there with all these strengths. Let's work backwards to figure out what we need to do to make that possible. And it's translating those dreams into actionable steps and actionable plans. And then, of course, once you have that plan, then it's about executing on the plan. And that's about the destiny part of this, right? Or the delivery phase. This is where the thought translates into realization, or where a goal becomes a actualized result. So this is in this phase, you focus on implementing the design and sustaining momentum towards that implementation. And this is also a phase where there's continuous learning that's encouraged, continuous adjustments or pivots, and also celebration of progress. So part of this phase includes, we may not have every little detail tool to make this happen, but we know we have the strength, the foundation. We believe in ourselves. We've seen the future in dream phase. We have designed it to be able to achieve it. We're in action towards it. And part of getting to that end result is being open to learning and adjusting and celebrating the progress. And then the emphasizing collaboration and inclusion is key to all this. Appreciative inquiry is really about a highly participative environment where everyone is involved it's a wide range of stakeholders that are involved. It's not done in a vacuum or in the small teams. It's a broader input. It's very inclusive. So you have diverse inputs and perspective that are heard and are fosters. And that creates a sense of ownership, because that's ultimately the way this works, right? You want to be able to achieve this change from the as-is to well-be by having people own that process. So these are the key steps, and they're just beautifully laid out. And there may be people doing different things that are similar to this. Design thinking has a lot of similarity to this, but this is just an effective way to look at how you can take the best of your organization, put it forward, design a plan around it, and then execute on it.
Yeah, what I like about this is it does kind of have that conscious capitalist approach of involving all the stakeholder input, right? And you're co-creating. So it's not just, this top-down thing like we're talking about is bringing everyone together from all different departments and things like that, so that you're getting a much broader perspective and more diverse opinion and thought in the mix there. And that's super powerful. So there's some core principles around this. So Appreciative Inquiry, it's built on 5 foundational principles that guide its application. So understanding these helps us grasp why it's so effective in driving positive change. Ash, let's get into these. What are these initial principles here? Let's talk about.
Absolutely. So the first one is called the constructionist principle. So So this principle is based on the idea that reality is socially constructed through language and conversations we have with each other. Our understanding of the world and our organizations is shaped by the stories we tell and the dialogues we engage in. So by focusing on positive narratives, we can reshape perceptions and the possibilities that we have, right? The second principle is the principle of simultaneity or simultaneity. I don't know if I said that correctly, but that principle essentially is the inquiry and change are not separate processes. The moment you ask the question, we begin to create change. This means that the types of questions we ask are crucial. They set the stage for what we discover and ultimately what we create. So positive questions typically lead to positive change. Steve,
I like that.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
That's very existentialist, actually.
Yeah.
I think you go on YouTube and you can probably find about a gazillion videos on manifestation and stuff like that. That's just become very popular. This is like maybe like practical principles to really make that happen in a way. And I love that the positive questions lead to positive change. In fact, I just want to just sit on that for a second, just to.
I love this idea that the moment you ask the question, we begin to create change. I mean, when you think about it, the question plants the seed for curiosity. And in that moment, imagination kicks in, and that will eventually lead to change. It's inevitable. It's very, very powerful.
Right. And the inverse of that, and I think a majority of us run into this problem, the negative questions we ask, whether it's a paranoia or whatever we have.
Right.
I actually I stewed on this for a second. I'm like, wait, I've asked myself negative questions that then led to negative thought processes, that negative actions tied to that. And I'm like, wow, this is actually a very powerful principle. Ask yourself the more positive question.
Yeah, I need to say that again. Positive questions lead to positive change. I think that's one that I need to sit with.
That would be like the opposite of appreciative inquiry. That would probably be I don't know, self-sabotage inquiry,
Yeah, absolutely. So now the next principle here is the poetic principle. Organizations are like open books. They are constantly being co-authored. So we can choose what we focus on, just like choosing which chapters of a book to read. So by paying attention to stories of success and innovation, we invite more of those experiences. Now, I have to give feedback on this principle here because I think a lot of my development came from the stories that I would read and that were motivational and impactful to me. And I think those guided me along my path, right? And now that I think back to it, I think even today we tell ourselves that the stories that we want to accomplish, typically there's like a magic or something that comes with that, I feel. And I think storytelling is very powerful, especially with how we are able to imagine what we want in our lives and what we want to accomplish.
There's also an element in here that's super powerful about sometimes there's the tendency to say, this is how we did it where I was.
Yeah.
And you're bringing forward limited thinking because it's already been packaged, right? Where this is about co-authoring new ideas. Yeah. So it's like you have a blank page. In a blank page, you could borrow from your thoughts, but you're better off actually defining it from scratch. And so I'll never forget, I think it was 28 years ago, I joined a company that was a tech company that was growing, and I was their first VP of sales and marketing. And I had a question for the CEO. Listen, how have we done this in the past? I was just trying to make sure we were aligning with where we were going. And the response was, we gave you a blank book with blank pages, write our history. And I was like, write our history. And that was the moment I realized, I see what we need to do here. We're defining this from new. Yeah. And I started engaging the team and let's define our future. That company is now a $4.4 billion company, but it's really, it says poetic, but it's really a powerful principle to be open to the idea that you haven't had everything figured out from your past experience. Definitely borrow from them, but in this environment, it's about co-authoring. And sometimes the greatest innovation comes from the people you least expect, which is why you got to open this up to a lot more people.
I think this kind of flows into our next principle a little bit here. Ash,
yeah.
What do we got?
Anticipatory principle. So our actions today are influenced by our visions of the future. If we have a positive image of the future, we're more likely to take actions that lead us toward it. This principle underscores the power of hope and inspiration in driving change. This is very powerful. I think when you really think about, the negative thoughts you have of the future, if you're feeling that the thoughts tend to be bleak, I could say this from personal experience, and I've had to self-regulate, where if I'm thinking of something negatively, I find that my actions tend to also emulate that negative outcome that I keep thinking that is coming my way. I'm so worried about it. But then I'm like, wait, hold on. What actions did I take today that are actually leading to that outcome? Why is it that I seem more compelled towards that direction? It's because I already created the story. Then I've had experiences where we're talking about the positive of what we want to accomplish, the future, the bright future that's ahead. And I find that the actions, the motivations tend to lean towards that direction as well. So I think that's very, very powerful, anticipating what's ahead of you. And I think you're naturally guiding towards that direction. Really self-regulate. I think a lot of people deal with that problem.
I think this is such a powerful thing. And there's practical examples of it. Let's say companies, when we went through major recessions, there were companies who saw doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Oh, it's coming. And many of them struggled and suffered. Some of them failed. And then there were those who were like, oh, there's a great opportunity to innovate and capture new markets and reinvent ourselves. And those companies came out to be the next unicorns. And you're right. Whatever you perceive in the future, your thought process will generate the outcomes. I mean, that's neuroscience. That's why mantras are so powerful. If you keep repeating a positive image of the future as if it's happening now, you will eventually act in according with that vision. So this is such a powerful thing. This anticipatory principle is like key.
And when I think about it, we're a couple of weeks away from the new year, right? And so this is a time when people are setting those, intentions and things for the year, and a lot of them, might be health based, and I think about like weight loss is just like a common one. And this one, it just really ties into kind of that manifesting. Okay, here's how I kind of view myself in the future. And then today, what am I going to do toward that? And sticking with that and doing that little bit by little, little makes a lot. So it's like, we're just on the cusp of the new year. So I think it's a very apropos principle to ponder here for a moment.
Absolutely. And I think the best example, if you want to think of something practical, right? Let's take Apple, right? And I think it was that time of 97 or 90, around that late 90s, right? Where it was the difference between how the previous CEO slowly saw the direction that the company was going. And I think there was Dell who was saying run away from the stock. They saw doom and gloom. But then you had Steve Jobs that had just brought on, who saw an opportunity of something beautiful that was about to happen with all of this. And despite all the negativity that was going around, his anticipation of the future, I think what led to the success of Apple. And I think that's such an old example. When you think about it, that is a very powerful one, where you have one side that saw doom and gloom, and guess what happened to all those people? They doomed and gloomed. They lost their jobs. They got kicked out, whatever it was. And then Apple ended up still flourishing under the leadership of someone who anticipated a very bright future. So on that note, jumping into positivity, right? When Steve came in there, he had a positive mental space of, hey, this is what the future is going to look like, and everyone's going to follow this approach. We have the positive principle, right? So positive questions and conversations lead to positive outcomes. Positive emotions like hope, inspiration, and joy expand our capacity for creativity and problem solving. And by focusing on strengths, we generate this energy, the energy needed for transformation. So you have to imagine positivity led to the idea of think different, which was the campaign that then launched, that just revamped and launched Apple up into the place it became.
I like
that. Think about that.
Yeah, that last thought of yours there, Ash. By focusing on strengths, we generate the energy needed for transformation. I think we spend so much energy on anxiety and things like that, right? Where, like you're mentioning, like just fearing the future. But when you can get behind something that's more positive, now you're actually giving yourself energy versus draining yourself of the energy. That's the way I see that. It's
kind of like, love and hate cannot coexist. It's one or the other. Fear and hope cannot coexist. It's either one or the other. So you can't have feet on both sides. The mindset of lack cannot coexist with a mindset of abundance. It's one or the other. So, and the outcome will be commensurate with what the thought process is, always. Always like that.
No, absolutely. So now how do we connect this all together to practice? These principles encourage us to shift from a deficit mindset to one that seeks out and builds upon what's working well. They remind us that change is a dynamic, a collaborative process influenced by our interactions and the language we use. So it's so important to maintain that positive outlook, no matter what's happening. It's like, hey, where are we strong in? Where can we double down? And then going back to the previous example of Apple, he doubled down on that message. Hey, we're going to think different. That's who we are. And he ended up creating and galvanizing around this principle that, hey, we have a different approach. But what did Steve really do? He just doubled down on what their strengths were, right? What their best products were at the time. And then he just saw and he created a positive future or thought process around it and brought everyone in. And that was it. They blew up. So I think really having those positive conversations amongst your team and your constituents, your peers, and so on and so forth, it really can change the dynamic. Negative conversations can too. So really thinking about those two, those dichotomies of like, okay, I'm going to come in here and be tough. Well, if you have a tough conversation and it has this negative connotation attached to it, I can imagine the negative feelings and the negative outcomes that come with that, right? Just as, history has shown us. So
yeah, this is very hard to do because I think everyone's kind of programmed, right, to kind of have that deficit mindset, hey, here's the problem, and just going at it. And that's just where we start from. And we don't ask, we don't flip it to ask some sort of positive question on it. It's just not in our programming naturally, at least in this country for sure.
I agree. It's very hard, especially depending what generation you came from. I mean, imagine the generation that came out of the Spanish influenza and World War I or the Great Depression. That generation was very aware of the possibility of lack.
Yeah.
Then you had World War II generation. That generation, especially in Europe, was very aware of the possibility of lack. So it can shape. So it's very difficult to shift that mindset because you can get stuck in, well, this is what we know, right? But you can keep recreating that if that's all you think about, if that's what you live in that mindset.
Yeah. And you have like whole families, like you said, Tulio, you're coming out of that era and it just affects whole families and generations even.
Yeah, it becomes like a generational curse that you have to break. It's a real thing.
I just think of that. One of my friends is just going through that same thing. It's like, we have this exact mindset in our family. He's trying to do something different to change it, but it's it's very powerful and it's it's programmed in us. It's hard to shake.
It is, and to some degree, I mean, not to get all esoteric on this, it becomes sacred work breaking out of that cycle for the next generation. It really does. That's the whole, and whoever does it is up for an uphill battle, but you got to do it or your next generation continues it. You got to be the one who chooses to stop it. Yeah. So it's, and we're just sharing some ways to do that. One of the things I love about this appreciative inquiry, and that's why I actually love force field analysis, because the first stage of force field analysis is identifying all the good, all the driving forces, right? And the next stage is we talk about the hindering forces. And the language you use makes a difference too. We're not talking about blockages. We're just talking about the things that are hindering that positive, progressive work to achieve its purpose, to get to the future intended outcome. There's some forces that are hindering it. So you look at them as a way to raise awareness on what you need to remove so you can continue to accelerate what's working. And so it's a beautiful thing. So let's talk about some examples, some concrete examples. By now, people are like, okay, how does this work?
Yeah, how does this work in business? Let's come up with
how does this work in business? Show me the money, how this works. All right, so picture a mid-sized tech firm facing low employee morales and high turnover. This is actually a very, very realistic example. Happens all the time. So what do companies do? Well, they'll start conducting exit interviews to find out why people are leaving. And they decide instead to apply appreciative inquiry, which instead of doing these exit interviews to find out what's wrong, they begin to hold workshops where employees share their stories of when they felt the most engaged and the most valued. So through this discovery phase, they begin to identify these key themes, collaborative projects, recognition from leadership, opportunities for professional growth. These things bubble up. Like, why are you here? What makes you excited to be here? And it becomes a way to bubble up the positive of why people are there, and reminds leadership of the things that keeps people engaged. So through this discovery phase, you begin to identify the key themes that you can amplify internally. Now, in the dream phase, right, that's when you can begin to envision with the employees a culture in the company that is consistently providing those things that matter to those employees and those positive experiences. So now you begin to see the basis for why people are engaged and what you need to amplify and consistently do, and envision a future if that were to happen, right? So if your turnover rate's 20%, you can envision a future where it's 3% because you're amplifying the things that are actually positive. And so then in the that's what you do in the dream phase. Now in the design phase, it's like, okay, how do we implement this dream, right? We know what it's going to take. We need to develop a plan. So in this is where you get a cross-functional teams that can develop these initiatives, like maybe mentorship programs or peer recognition platforms or regular town hall meetings where these success stories and these positive things are shared. So you begin to design a plan on how to make this part of your day-to-day culture. And then in the destiny phase, right, it's about implementing, moving it forward. This is about leading to a significant increase in employee satisfaction and reduction in turnover. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? So the lesson here is that by focusing on the strengths and involving the employees in the change process, the company can unlock solutions that were both effective and sustainable, and then transform the organization's culture from what is already within the organization. You know, it's not even a transformation. It's just an amplification of what's already there. Most transformation are not significantly change. It's just amplifying what's already working. Identifying that is the key to this process. And then having a dream of what it would look like if everyone got recognized in the way those positive stories were told. And then having a plan to make that, institutionalize that, and then seeing it through. So that's the key to making this happen. That's a real life example that can be applied. And it's not very complicated. It just takes some conscious thought to focus on discovering those strengths, amplifying them, dreaming, and then putting a plan to make that part of the culture every day.
Yeah, I like the idea of the sort of the regular town hall. I mean, and maybe the word regular there is kind of key, where it's something like, you know, we're always talking about systems, right? So it's something that's just part of a system, it's part of a feedback loop, right? So it's just make this something regular in your system and bring these, you know, concepts forward and just do it out of habit, not just, hey, let's do this once, you know, just not a one-off. We don't want a one-off. All right, let's, I want to compare this a little bit to the traditional problem-solving approach, right? So, you know, traditionally the methods start by, like I mentioned, identifying problems, you know, analyzing the root cause and try to fix what's broken. So like we mentioned, this is that deficit-based approach, and that can sometimes lead, like we said, to the negative focus, the blame, and a limited view of possibilities. And it's really tricky to get out of that habit too, because that's just our natural default. So it may also inadvertently reinforce the very issues we're trying to resolve by keeping attention on them. And you might find a little defensiveness in that process, I think, too, with some people when you're approaching it from this sort of deficit mindset. And like I said, this is very hard to get out of. So if people are tripping along these lines, quite often, I certainly been there, done that. We'll probably still do it, you know, despite as hard as I try. So, but really you have to be mindful of just your approach there. So in the appreciative inquiry approach, so contrasting that, we're beginning with what's working well. So, hey, what are you doing well here on this particular item? This is great. You're successful here. We're doing really well here. We're doing, great in this aspect of the work. And so then you want to leverage these positives as kind of the foundation for building the better future. So it's like, this is where you get, like I mentioned, that energy, that positive energy, the enthusiasm, and that openness to innovation. You feel it. You're not wasting energy on these other things where you're not even working on the problem, but you're thinking about it. It's weighing you down and slowing you down. So the advantages of focusing on strengths. So by amplifying strengths, we kind of create this ripple effect, that can transform your organizational dynamics. And you're encouraging a culture of appreciation where people feel valued and motivated. And you're focusing on success and how that can build confidence and reinforce the behaviors that contribute to these positive outcomes. So some might worry here that it overlooks issues that need attention. So it doesn't ignore problems, but it reframes them. So, for example, if communication is a problem, appreciative inquiry would explore times when communication was excellent and how to replicate those conditions. It's about redirecting the energy from fixing deficits to creating abilities. So you've got a problem in a meeting with communication or something between teammates. It's like, hey, we worked really well when this happened, this happened, this happened. And keeping that, forward thinking. It's that feed forward mentality, almost we talked about in the last communication style approach, right? We're really thinking forward on this. So Ash, let's dive deeper a little bit in here. So on those team dynamics.
Yeah. So the impact on team dynamics, when we talk about diving a little bit deeper into appreciative inquiry, people start to see each other as allies working towards a common vision. When you talk about overcoming initial skepticism, some team members might be skeptical at first, especially if they're used to focusing on problems. And that's very normal, right? When something bad is happening, people think that the typical response is to approach it with a stern attitude or stern tone, and really highlighting that this is the problem, you did bad. And people are used to doing that approach, right? So when you're coming to a more positive way of communicating an issue that's happening, they're a little bit skeptical. Hey, I'm used to approaching it this way, but I guess this is interesting, right? So it's important to facilitate initial sessions effectively, ensuring everyone feels heard and valued. And then on top of all, there's some practical tips for leaders too. So start small by incorporating appreciative questions in meetings. Ask team members to share recent successes or what they're proud of. And you see them light up, right? And you go, okay, this is an area that they value, right? And then lastly, when you think about this, it gradually then will shift the organizational narrative towards a more positive culture, essentially, in comparison to a more negative, oh, I'm afraid I made a mistake and I'm in trouble type of culture.
That's like we talk about our wins, right? And start really the week.
Yeah.
By giving people an opportunity to think that way.
Yeah. I mean, we practice this. We start by giving bliss to people, like what we are appreciative of someone who did something. And then we talk about our wins. I mean, it's like a great way to, like you said, it's a great way to get things started with positive. And then we talk about the challenges. By the time we talk about the challenges, everybody's feeling good about themselves,
Yeah.
And so the whole point of this is it's important to be realistic too, right? So the first step is to create a safe space. Psychological safety is key to this. It's important people feel they can openly share and dream. Some people can envision the future more than others, right? So they need to feel safe enough to share that. And then this is about leaders needing to foster an environment where all contributions are welcome without judgment. That's the key thing, right? So even jokingly putting something down could be very detrimental to this process. So just stay neutral, stay open, welcome all thoughts. And then, it's not about being a bunch of Pollyannas, right? Just happy, positive. It's about balancing that with reality. So we want to focus on strengths, but it's also essential to stay grounded, right? The aim isn't to just ignore the challenge, right? It's to approach it from a place of possibility. Possibility is the key. And then sustaining momentum is key because especially in the destiny phase, that's where commitment is required. It's nice to dream, but if you don't commit to the action plan in the destiny phase, then nothing worse than having a dream and falling flat on it. Then everybody's discouraged from that. So you want to celebrate even the small wins along the way with a level of enthusiasm, because you want to keep people encouraged and reinforce that while it's challenging, the outcomes are going to be positive. That's the other thing too. In this destiny phase, you want to remind people what they dreamed about, because there are times it gets really hard. So you want to just remind I can't wait till we get to this goal that we've dreamed about. It's going to be amazing when we accomplish X, Y, Z. It's going to be a game changer when we get to this place because of our strengths. So it's an opportunity to remind the team along the way when things get difficult to stay the course.
Yeah. So it's a good conversation, guys. So let me recap here. So we've talked about that 4D cycle. So discover, dream, design, and destiny. That's kind of guiding organizations through this process of identifying the strengths and envisioning a positive future. And then there was the 5 key principles. You got the constructionist principle. So reality is socially constructed through language and conversations. The principle of simultaneity. Inquiry and change occur simultaneously. The questions we ask shape the change. Then you have the poetic principle. Organizations are open to interpretations. We can choose to focus. We can choose the focus of our stories. And then the anticipatory principle. Positive images of the future lead to positive actions. And then the positive principle. Positive questions and interactions lead to positive outcomes. Yeah. So again, the difference between the traditional methods on focusing on fixing problems, which can reinforce negative aspects, and the appreciative inquiry focuses on amplifying strengths, fostering a positive and creative environment. That's it for today's show. Thank you for joining us. If you can, please share, like, and subscribe, and we will see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.